an instructor in the Department of Art History here at the University of Arkansas's amazing School of Art. Welcome, colleagues, students, and the larger university community. Thank you for joining us this evening. Before I introduce our esteemed visiting scholar, Dr. Sarah E. Thompson, please allow me to extend special thanks to the Department of Art History, in particular, Professors Lynn Jacobs and John Blakinger. The Fine Arts Center Gallery directors, Mark Mitchell and Miriam Amir Fagethi, and Laurel Lamb, the University Museum Curator of Education and Engagement. Without their support, guidance, and expertise, this guest lecture and the corresponding exhibition and art history course could not have come to fruition. My heartfelt thanks and gratitude. Without further ado, I'm honored to introduce our wonderful speaker. Sarah E. Thompson is one of several curators of Japanese art at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, specializing in Japanese prints. She received the PhD in Japanese art from Columbia University and taught Japanese and Asian art at Vassar College, Oberlin College, and the University of Oregon before moving to the MFA in 2004. From 2005 to 2010, as part of the Japanese Print Access and Documentation Project, she created the digital catalog of the MFA's collection of over 50,000 Japanese prints, the largest collection outside Japan. She has curated numerous exhibitions at the MFA and elsewhere, including a major Hokusai retrospective at the MFA in 2015, Showdown Kuniyoshi versus Kunisada in 2017, and Tattoos in Japanese Prints at the Asian Art Museum of San Francisco in 2019. Today, she will share with us, as you can imagine, only one of her numerous fascinating studies or stories about the world of Japanese prints through her lecture entitled Rival Artists of 19th Century Japan, Kuniyoshi versus Kunisada. After the lecture, Dr. Thompson would be more than happy to discuss your questions. I hope you'll enjoy this gathering. Dr. Thompson, I now happily pass the full Zoom screen over to you. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Omi, for that lovely introduction, and thanks to the School of Art for hosting me. Now, let me see if I can succeed in bringing up my slides. Will this work? Aha. Yes, all right, there we go. As Omi just said, I will be talking about the rival artists, Kuniyoshi versus Kunisada. These were the two top artists in mid-19th century Japan, doing print designs that involve the actors, characters from books, all kinds of very interesting things. They were not popular until recent years. For a long time, collectors and connoisseurs thought that the landscape prints were the only really good prints in the 19th century. But now, over the past few decades, the figure prints, and especially these two outstanding artists, have become very, very popular. So we had a traveling exhibition that went to Japan in 2015, and then in 2017, we did our own version of the show at the MFA Boston. So what I'll be showing you is largely based on that. Who were these two artists? Well, Kuniyoshi, you see on the left, that wonderful image of the wicked sorceress using a scroll of magic spells to call up a giant skeleton. He did action adventure stories, monsters. He's very clearly a precursor of present day manga and anime, which is probably why he's become so popular over the past couple of decades. Kunisada is just now starting to become popular. He is the one that you see on the right, and his specialty was Kabuki actors. He was very, very good at getting the likenesses of the actors. You can see their caricatures, the facial features are exaggerated, but they really looked like those top stars of the Kabuki theater. And he was enormously successful at the time. So here are the two artists as they looked. These are actually memorial pictures that were published just after their deaths. Usually those memorial pictures were for very famous people such as Kabuki actors, but these artists were so successful that the public was mourning them and wanted to buy the pictures of them also. So there is Kunisada. He was the older, but he also lived longer. So that shows him probably pretty much the way he looked toward the end of his life. He is holding a Buddhist rosary in his hand and thinking about moving on, we hope, to paradise. Then on the left is Kuniyoshi, who was a decade younger, but died slightly before Kunisada. Unfortunately, he was ill for several years toward the end of his life. So the artist in this case has been flattering and has shown him looking younger than he really was. The other person with him is a student of his who had also died of illness just shortly before Kuniyoshi. And so the artist imagines them going on a trip together. They're on a journey, dressed for travel, going to the next world. Now, these were not their real names. Kuniyoshi, his actual legal name was Ikusa Mago Saburo. Kunisada was Sumida Shozo, but nobody ever knows them by those names. I actually had to look them up to remind myself. They're always known as Utagawa Kuniyoshi and Utagawa Kunisada, and those were their art names. They belong to the Utagawa School of Artists. It's organized like a family. The family name comes first in Japanese. So this is members of the art family Utagawa, and they were both students of an artist named Toyo Kuni. It was customary for the pupils to get names that incorporated part of the teacher's name, so they're Kuniyoshi and Kunisada. Now, they are two of the four top artists of the time. If you look in the early to mid 19th century, who were the most famous artists doing woodblock prints in Japan. Everyone knows about Hokusai. And if you had asked who is the best, most people would have named him. He is the person who designed the Great Wave, which is one of the most famous works of art in the world. It is actually a woodblock print designed by this artist. Then the other artist very famous for landscapes is Hiroshige. He's down at the lower right. Just showed a particularly attractive cityscape by him. And then Kunisada did Kabuki actors. Kuniyoshi did action adventure. Actually, all of them did all the subjects, but these were their specialties. Now, Kunisada was far and away the most prolific. He was the best-selling print artist in all the history of Japanese woodblock prints, both in terms of the number of designs that he made and also in terms of how well he sold. People really, really wanted to buy his prints. The next two most popular were Kuniyoshi and Hiroshige. They were also very, very prolific, as you see, probably about 10,000 designs each. Hokusai is the one who, even at the time, was considered to be the best in terms of artistic quality. So the reason he has far fewer designs, he only did about 1,800, that's because he considered himself primarily a painter. He did one-of-a-kind paintings, which were much more prestigious, of course, expensive, but they take much longer to do. Secondarily, he was a book illustrator. He did lots of book illustrations, as for his very famous Hokusai manga, the sketchbooks. And his third priority was doing print designs, so he didn't do as many as the others. And in fact, again, all of these artists did paintings and book illustrations as well, but it was a matter of priorities and how their careers worked out. Now, the reason those numbers are so enormous, the reason Kunisada was able to do something like 20,000 to possibly as many as 35,000 designs is, wait a minute, get the head, they are not the only, they're not doing it all by themselves. It's not like, Rembrandt making etchings where he does the whole thing by himself. But in the case of the ukiyo-e prints, they were a commercial product that was mass produced. So all the artist did was draw the design. That means that artists can draw lots and lots and lots of designs, if you think about it. In fact, it's been estimated that during his most productive period, Kunisada may have done as many as 3 per day. just drawing the basic picture that is going to be turned into a multicolor woodblock print. So those drawings, they must first be approved. A government censor has to say, yes, it's okay to publish this. Then it goes to a professional block cutter who makes a block for printing, one separate block for each color. I'll show you how in a moment. The printer is a third person who uses those blocks to print. It's all done by hand. The Japanese did not use a printing press. So he inks the blocks, puts the paper face down, and rubs. The whole thing is controlled by the publisher. He's kind of like the producer of a movie. He hires everyone else. He arranges the whole thing, and then he, the publisher, owns a bookstore, which is where the prints are sold. And you see there a book illustration by Hokusai showing one of the bookstores where his works were sold. Now back to the terminology. I'll be throwing these terms around, so just to let you know what I'll be talking about. The place where most of the prints were made, and they were a special product of that city, was Edo, which of course is what we know today as Tokyo. So this is a good crossword puzzle word. If the crossword puzzle wants the old name of Tokyo in 3 letters, it's going to be Edo. If by any chance they want 4 letters, stick a Y in front. That's an archaic spelling. But that is the city. It's also the name of the period from 1615 to 1868. It's called either the Edo period or sometimes the Tokugawa period. Tokugawa was the family name of the clan of samurai who held the position of shogun. So the shogun is the ruler of Japan at this time. There is also an emperor who is mainly a figurehead. So the shogun rules in the name of the emperor. The other very important thing about Japan during this historical period is that it is largely, though not completely, cut off from the rest of the world. Japanese are not allowed to travel. Only a few foreigners are allowed to come to Japan, Chinese, Koreans, and the only Europeans who were allowed to come in were the Dutch. One European country Japan maintained contact with. Now, during this time, a very vibrant, lively, urban popular culture grew up. And that urban popular culture was known as the floating world. The art associated with it is ukiyo-e, pictures of the floating world, which includes paintings, books, and prints, but the prints are what is especially popular. So we'll go through and look at the history. By the way, pronunciation of Japanese, it's very easy. Consonants as in English, vowels as in Spanish, or Italian if you happen to know Italian better than Spanish. So again, the people involved in making the prints. Now, this process is still done today. There are several companies in Japan that make reproductions by the same method as the old prints. This is from the website of one of them, the Adachi Institute of Woodcut Prints. And here you see a present-day block cutter on the left and a present-day printer on the right, but they still are doing it in pretty much the same way that it was done in the old days. Now, how this worked. Oh, I think an important bit, I don't know if I can do this. All right, an important part of that picture is cut off at the right. Oh, well. All right, this is a so-called key block print, and I say note the guide marks along one side, but the edge has been cut so you don't see the guide marks. Sorry about that. Anyway, the way that you manage to print several colors and get them all in the right place is that there are little guides at the edge that you match the paper to, and you match the paper on each block so that it comes out right. And I'm sorry, this is not more clear. It took the Japanese a while to do this. They worked on it for about 20 years trying to figure out how to do it. And finally, there's a breakthrough in the year 1765. And the reason we know that date so definitely is that the first woodblock prints in Japan that were made on a large scale, not just experiments, but really going full out and doing it and making probably at least several hundred copies at that time, those were calendars for the year 1765. So they must have been made at the beginning of that year or possibly at the very end of 1764. The Japanese did not invent color printing already begun in China over a century earlier. This is from the MFA collection, a very beautiful Chinese color that's over a century before the Japanese figured out how to do it. It says my internet connection is unstable. Sorry about that. I hope it's not causing problems for you. All right. Now, remember, at this time, the Japanese are not allowed to travel to China. Nobody can go there to learn how this was done. They knew about the books because those were brought to Japan and sold by Chinese merchants, but none of the merchants knew how the books had been made. So the Japanese basically had to reverse engineer the technology. In the end, they went even further than the Chinese printers had, because although this was done in China very beautifully, it was done for art book illustrations, and those were still somewhat expensive and somewhat limited in their circulation. But the Japanese developed very cheap color printing that by the 19th century, almost anyone in a big city could afford. Interestingly enough, in terms of the cheapness of the technology and the fact that it was very widespread, that almost anyone could have it, they were actually ahead of the Western countries in that respect. In Europe and in America, although certainly full color printing was possible, it was still rather expensive. And for popular prints that anyone could buy, usually it was black and white lithographs that were colored by hand. So here's an American print from 1855, typical Currier and Ives print. The same time that Kuniyoshi and Kunisada were doing gorgeous full color prints in Japan. This is very nice looking, but it is hand colored. And color lithography really gets very big in Europe and the US several decades later at the end of the 19th century. Now, once again, here is that terminology that I mentioned, the floating world. Let's talk about the floating world and how it originated. Back in the 17th century, the cities became quite important in Japan. Kyoto, of course, had always been the major city. It was the imperial capital for many centuries. But now, although the emperor was still there in Kyoto, the shoguns, the Tokugawa family of shoguns, had established themselves in the city of Edo. So it quickly went from being a little village to being a large, important city. Also, the city of Osaka became large and important at this time. And we really see in Japan, beginning in the 17th century, the development of a very urban, city-based culture. There also are things like the rise of a cash economy as opposed to barter, the rise of a middle class, rise in the rate of literacy. So many of the kinds of developments that happen in Europe at around the same time, more or less by coincidence, are happening in Japan also. But we're going to be looking at the hedonistic, pleasure-loving side, all the things that people who had a little bit of disposable income were doing in the 17th century. So Kabuki theater develops at this time. And here you see two very beautiful painted screens in the MFA. They are thought to have been made at the end of the 17th century, but they show kind of nostalgic scenes of earlier in the century. And the two mainstays of the floating world, Kabuki and the Yoshiwara. What is the Yoshiwara? It is the official legal red light district. Prostitution is legal provided that it is done in the right place, under the right circumstances. Everything is very organized, taxes are paid. There was also illegal prostitution, which had more of the kind of sleazy associations that we would think of. But what went on with the Yoshiwara at the top level was quite different. The top-ranked Yoshiwara courtesans were somewhat like pop stars today. They were very famous, considered very beautiful, very elegant. They were the style setters. Other women wanted to look like them and dress like them, not necessarily to be them. Everyone recognized that there were certain disadvantages to this life, but they were very greatly admired. The Kabuki theater, interestingly enough, was founded early in the 17th century by a woman. And women's kabuki was common for several decades. However, that came to be associated with illegal prostitution. And so eventually women were banned from stage. And by the end of the 17th century, all kabuki actors had to be male. So it's an all-male theater with men playing the women's parts as well as the male parts. Also, at that point, they really had to develop artistry and start doing plays with plots and not just sexy song and dance numbers. But it developed into a very sophisticated theatrical form, and we'll see lots and lots and lots of kabuki in the woodblock prints. Now, just in terms of the technology and how it developed, the single sheet prints that are what we're talking about when we talk about Japanese prints came out of book illustrations. Many more people were now literate and had a little bit of spending money. And so suddenly there was a market for popular printing. Now, printing with carved woodblocks had been known in Japan for a long time. It actually goes back to the 8th century, but it mostly had been done in a Buddhist context, printing prayers or scriptures, things of that kind. Now, it began to be used first for works of classical literature in printed versions, so educational things for the masses. But then people wanted to read stories about contemporary life, especially fun things about, playboys whooping it up in the Yoshiwara. So stories of that kind began to be written and be illustrated. These are all by the same artist, Moronobu. He's the first ukiyo-e artist that we know about. There were others before him, but we don't know their names. And so there's a classical book at the upper left, a modern book or a book that's a mix of old and new stories. So you see a legend of a samurai fighting a demon in that book, but then the other page has people in fashionable modern clothes. And then here at the bottom is a single sheet print showing a young man and a woman. And this, most likely, the woman is a courtesan. That is the nice euphemism that we use for the high-ranking women of the Yoshiwara. And this is a young man that she is with. The figure in front is actually a male. You can tell by the hairstyle. But he's a teenager. He's got the top of his head shaved. He hasn't had the adulthood ceremony yet. At that point, he'll have the front of the head shaved, because that is the official hairstyle for adult men. So here are this charming young couple. And he has got his hand down the front of her kimono, but it's still more or less R-rated. It is, however, the first of a set of 12, and the other 11 prints in this series are much more explicit. When the prints first started to be made, there was no rule against explicit erotica, and so there's a fair amount of it, as you can imagine, but it was made illegal in the 1720s. It still continued to be made, but they had to be kind of under the counter about it. But here you see the basic characteristics of ukiyo-e: very elegant, fashionable clothing, beautiful black line. These are prints from the early 1700s. They're rather large. And again, the two subjects that were the most popular, beautiful women, especially women of the Yoshiwara, but not always. There are other kinds of women that we see quite often in prints also. And then kabuki actors, as you see, actor doing a dance on the right. At this point, as I said, only adult men with the front of the head shaven were allowed to appear on stage, but the pretty young ones would kind of fidget by wearing purple scarves over the front of the head. So here is a handsome young actor with a purple scarf, hiding the fact that actually he's not a teenager anymore, or at least he's a legal adult who has his head shaved, and doing a dance. Now, you'll notice these prints have color. Remember, these are commercial products. So They're being sold in stores, and each publisher wants his prints to look better than the next guy's. So they were hand colored. The color is it's just printed in black and white, and then the color is put on by hand. Gradually, beginning in the 1740s, as the Japanese found out about those wonderful Chinese color prints and tried to work out how to do it themselves, they started experimenting with printing the colors on as opposed to painting them on by hand. This continued from the 1740s into the early 1760s, and then, as I mentioned before, the breakthrough is in 1765. These are two prints by the same artist, Harunobu, who's very important in the history of Japanese prints because he was the first artist to design prints that were printed in full color. Full color is defined as 5 or more colors in addition to the black outlines. So that's early 1760s on the left, and if you look carefully, there are only 3 color blocks in that print, although it looks like more because the colors have been overlapped. And then here on the right, this lovely young lady playing the koto, a Japanese instrument similar to a zither. I'm not sure how many colors are in that, but you can count the different colors, and remember there would be a different block for each one. So the full color print with 5 or more colors came to be known as brocade prints. That's nichikie in Japanese, because they were very colorful and beautiful and looked like brocade. In terms of subject matter, the one on the left is something a little different. Actors and women were the 2 big things, but there were other subjects all along. There were landscapes, there were nature studies, and this is a history print. It shows a warrior, a scene of a warrior from the 14th century in a famous historical incident where he's writing a message on a tree for someone else who will come by later to read. Then in the print of the young lady playing koto, this is sometime between 1765 and 1770. Harunobu unfortunately died in 1770, but it means we can date every full color print by him within 5 years. So she is not a Yoshiwara courtesan. This is a young lady of a good family, some sort of upper class person. She's probably the daughter of a high-ranking samurai. You can tell that this is a young girl who's not yet married, and you can tell by the fact that the sleeves of her kimono hang down so long. So very long sleeves, not in the sense of going over her hands, but in the sense of hanging down from the arm. So she's either the daughter of a high-ranking samurai or possibly the daughter of a very rich merchant who wants to emulate the lifestyle of a high-ranking samurai. Technically, there were 4 social classes, supposedly in order of prestige. They were the samurai at the top, then the peasants who you should honor because they grow everybody's food, then the artisans who make things, and then the merchants who just make money off what other people do. And so morally, they're supposed to be at the bottom. Now, there was a problem because although this was the official ideology, it didn't work too well because so many of the merchants were getting rich and trying to move up to the level of the samurai. And there was all kinds of social tension related to that. Back to prints. Moving on into the 1780s, now they've totally mastered the full color printing process and are starting to see what else they can do. There is a standard size for prints. Almost all the prints are roughly about 10 inches by 15 inches. Or think of 2 sheets of standard printer paper together. That is the basic size. And if you think about those pictures we saw of the printer actually doing the prints, it's because that is just about the biggest size that one person can comfortably handle. You do it, you have it on a little table in front of you, you do the printing that way. It's very quick and easy, especially for a professional who does it all day, every day. Now, of course, it is possible to do bigger prints, to have larger blocks and larger sheets of paper, but it's a lot more work. You might even have to get up and move around in order to rub the back and do the different parts of the blocks. So if you want a bigger picture, the easiest way to do it is just to split it up and do more than one block. So that was what was typically done. Again, remember, these are commercial products. They want to churn out as many as possible, but also keep the quality high enough that people will want to buy them. So there are always these considerations. So we're going to see lots of triptychs. They start at this time in the 1780s, and sometimes we will see even larger print put together with this standard sized sheet. Now, there are other things you can do. We're now in the 1790s. These are the two top artists of the 90s. That is Utamaro on the left, who specialized in women, and Sharaku on the right, who specialized in actors. These are really the two artists who today are the most highly valued of all. If you find one of these in your attic, congratulations. They go for very, very high prices. Now, you'll notice something interesting here in addition to the colors. And unfortunately, the colors on both of these have faded. They really ought to be brighter, but they're so well designed, they look good anyway. They also have silvery mica on the background. It looks almost mirror-like, that silver color. That is the ground mineral mica, which you couldn't really print with, but it was put on to the back after the colors were printed. You then cover the printed part with a stencil and paint on the mica. So that was one special technique. There were other special techniques such as embossing, which is a special way of printing. Also, you could print a black area and then rub it with a smooth piece of a bone or something of that kind, and it would make it shiny. So there are different techniques that you can use. Now, at this point, we approach the real subject of our talk. This is the time when Toyokuni came on the scene, and he was not actually the founder of the Utagawa school, but he was the one who really made it big. He developed the Utagawa school so that they became the dominant force in ukiyo-e printmaking moving into the 19th century. That's an early work by him on the left, and you can see he's very much influenced by Sharaku, those extreme caricatures of actors. And he'll pass that on, of course, to his students, especially Kunisada, who was the star student and clearly his favorite. He also did beautiful women in elegant kimono. And there is a diptych, two standard size sheets making up one picture, combining the two subjects, showing both famous actors and beautiful women who presumably are their daughters or sisters or something like that. Now, the technology pretty much continues all the way until the beginning of the 20th century. But there is one big change that happens about 1830, and that is the introduction of a new pigment. It is the blue color that you see in things like Hokusai's famous Great Wave, and that is made with a special synthetic color imported from Europe. It was known in Japan as Berlin blue, and we know it as Prussian blue. So for the first time, it was possible to get very good, vibrant colors, not fade quickly. This made a big difference. It probably has something to do with the fact that landscape became popular at this time. So these were the new things that started in the 1830s, again, when our heroes Kunisada and Kuniyoshi were young artists just getting going. And suddenly, in addition to the actors and the women, these other subjects, which had been known all along but had not been so popular, did become very, very popular. Landscapes. Suddenly, everybody wanted Hokusai-style landscapes. Also, the nature subjects, such as the bird and flower prints. This is the third Utagawa artist, Hiroshige, did landscapes and also the nature prints. And then there was a new subject, warrior prints, and the person responsible for making those popular was Kuniyoshi. Warrior prints was muchahe in Japanese. This was kind of a general term meaning historical subject. And there you see one of them. I'll show you some more of them in just a few minutes. So Here is our hero Kunisada. He is the star pupil of Toyokuni, and he becomes a top artist really when he is just when he is still quite young. He's born in 1786, so while he's still in his 20s, he begins to design these very wonderful actor prints, which remind everyone of the best works of his teacher Toyokuni, and also going back to that golden age of the 1790s, it reminds people of Sharaku. So here are two early works that are close-ups of famous actors. And the great thing that Kunisada was able to do that made him so popular was to capture a likeness. Now, clearly these are caricatures. Nobody really looks exactly like that. You don't have your eyes being almost all white with just the little pinpricks, but it does show the fact that this actor was known for a very ferocious expression with kind of a glaring look, and his chin kind of stuck out, and it actually captures his look in caricatures. Similarly, the guy on the left, Taemon, was known for a particular kind of attractive sneer that he could do, and there is the caricature version of it. People just love these because it looked like them. Remember, there's no photography yet. If you're a theater fan, you can't just go out and buy a photograph of your idol to have at your bedside or whatever you want to do with it. So the best thing you can do is buy a woodblock print. And this guy actually does prints that everyone agreed really look like the people they're supposed to be. The one there, in this case, he's clearly referring to Sharaku because he used the glittering mica background in that series also. So there's Sharaku from the 1790s, Kunisada from the 1810s. It was, I may add, rather brave of him to do this. Kunisada in general was not a risk taker, but he did take a big gamble as a young man because these spectacular close-up prints of actors had actually temporarily been made illegal in 1801. They were banned by the government because actors were supposed to be lowly people. You weren't supposed to worship them as idols or anything like that. And prints like this do kind of tend to make people think in those terms. So this was actually made illegal. Now, again, in Edo period Japan, you don't actually have out-of-date laws being repealed. Technically, they're still on the books, but in practice, they do tend to fall out of use. So after a while, it's probably safe to disobey it, but you don't actually know. So it is a gamble. So Kunisada, gambled and won that he would not be prosecuted if he started to do very spectacular close-ups once again. And having taken that lead early, he maintained it. After his teacher died in 1825, he was very clearly the top designer of actor prints, and since those were still the most popular thing, he was the top designer of woodblock prints in general. So here's a rather wonderful example of a triptych. This is now much later. The most successful. He took the small fortune, very large fortune. He was quite a wealthy man by the time that he died. And Kabuki was his specialty, although he did all kinds of other things too. Here's a very wonderful, very dramatic scene. You notice he's making good use of that Prussian blue color. It's a scene from a play. You have the hero in the left sheet. The central figure is the loyal retainer of the hero. And then that is on the right, the villain who has killed the hero's parents. They're chasing after him. They're at this river crossing where the travelers are carried across on these little raft-like platforms by the porters, but the villain has bribed the porters. And so they deliberately help him get away and foil the hero and the hero's henchmen. It's a very exciting scene. It's drawn as if that was real water, but this was an actual scene from a play. So probably you imagine stagehands holding the ends of a long sheet of blue cloth and waving it up and down to make the waves. This is one of my favorites. Kunisada did many scenes of actual kabuki plays that were performed He also did sometimes scenes of imaginary plays or scenes from imaginary productions that did not actually happen. I love this one. It is 8 sheets. And as far as I know, it is the tallest composite picture ever made by an ukiyo-e print designer. I didn't know at first that it was a composite picture. When I first cataloged it in the MFA collection, I thought it was 4 separate diptychs. And then I saw a museum exhibit in Japan and realized, oh my God, it's a tower. It stacks up, they're all together. So it is an imaginary scene that he's done in this very wonderful way. It is quite unusual to have multi-sheet images larger than a triptych. In fact, technically it was not legal to have more than 3 sheets together. So that's why this one was made as 4 diptychs that just coincidentally happened to fit together. But the publishers would do this kind of thing for Kunisada because they knew it would sell. I love this one. Technically, this is 2 triptychs that just happen to fit together. It's the interior of a Kabuki theater. All the actors are very recognizable. He is so good at drawing them that he doesn't necessarily have to write their names on. You can figure out who they are just by looking carefully. And it shows all the activities backstage at the theater. All the various things that are going on, both upstairs and downstairs. And you could imagine Kabuki fans could have spent hours with this, talking to each other about who the different actors were. 2 more examples, and these are also from the 1850s. Sometimes you have series, you have prints that could be a series, you could treat them as separate prints, but you can also put them together to make a long image. So the top one is various actors, and they are wearing very plainly colored summer yukata, that is summer kimono in light cotton. But then they're posing against kind of an imaginary background of fabric patterns. So you get a very gorgeous composition. Similarly, at the bottom, you have a group of 7 actors posing against a floral background. The one at the top, we're actually not quite sure what order they should be in. Clearly, the one at the right belongs on the right because that is the first. In Japanese, you read from right to left, whether it's text or pictures. The others could be in whatever order you want to put them in. For the set at the bottom with the background of flowers, they are actually numbered, so we know that yes, that is the order that they're in. It looks like a scene from a play, but it's actually characters from several different plays that were performed at around the same time, but they've been put together again in this imaginary scene. And once again, you could recognize the actors, even if only the names of the characters are given. Note that there appear to be 2 women in the bottom scene, but that, of course, is male kabuki actors playing the parts of the women. Now, these are real women. This is Kunisada's other top specialty. In this case, we're looking at Yoshiwara courtesans. There is an early work showing them lounging around. It says temporary lodgings because there'd been a fire in the Yoshiwara. They had to move to another location and then go back after rebuilding. And then here you see a parade. They're walking under the cherry blossoms in all of their gorgeous multicolored finery. But interestingly enough, it's all done in blue, as if it were monochrome, but the color is blue. They have red lips, but that's the only red. And note the date of 1831. When that gorgeous Prussian blue color came in, artists just went wild with it. You have people like Hokusai designing things like the Great Wave, but for artists like Kunisada and also Kuniyoshi, all kinds of wonderful, unrealistic, but very beautiful designs. The women that he draws are not necessarily all courtesans. There are all kinds of other women. These are just elegant, nicely dressed, affluent, and middle-class women. the two young unmarried women in the left and center sheets with the long sleeves, and then a young married woman, probably a friend of theirs, at the right. They are visiting a Shinto shrine that was famous for its beautiful wisteria. So you see the wisteria hanging down from a trellis. And this shrine was very close to where Kunisada lived. And if you look at the hanging lanterns in the center and right sheets, they're under their own little roof. Those were donated to the shrine as a gift. And there is I'm not sure if you would call it a signature. They have the name of the donor, which is Utagawa family. So Kunisada is showing off his own gift to this shrine. And by the way, if any of you read Japanese, you'll notice that by this time in the late 1840s or early 50s, he is signing himself Toyokuni. He took the name of his teacher in 1844. The original Toyokuni died in 1825. Kunisada took the name. He considered himself the second Toyokuni, but we call him Toyokuni III because someone else had used it in the meantime. So if you hear the name Toyokuni III, that is the same person as Kunisada. Kuniyoshi kept his name all along. One more thing that Kunisada was very famous for, and I put 2 asterisks on the title of this one to mean that this is one of the prints that is in your lovely album that is a treasure of the School of Art. So take good care of it and enjoy it. And I'm so happy that Omi is making good use of it. This is one of the prints. It's a triptych, as you see. There's 3 sheets of paper making up one picture by Kunisada. And I'm using, you'll have to excuse me, I'm using MFA's photographs just because those are easier for me to get at and to handle. But yours looks pretty much the same as this. This is by Kunisada. And another thing that he became very famous for was his illustrations of a best-selling popular novel, The Rustic Genji, Inaka Genji. Now, again, if you're familiar with Japanese culture, you may have heard of the Tale of Genji. That is the great work of classical Japanese literature, was written about the year 1000. So theoretically, educated people are all supposed to at least know something about it. This popular book that was written from 1829 to 42 was actually set in the 14th century, but it was a parody of the 11th century novel, which is about an imperial prince who has all kinds of romantic adventures with different women. So the 19th century bestseller was a combination of action, adventure, and romance. And it's about a young samurai, the son of a shogun, who has adventures and romantic adventures with many women, and also has all kinds of exciting adventures of thwarting plots against the shogunate. It's kind of a vaguely James Bond-like character. So lots and lots and lots of illustrations of this book. Kunisada had illustrated the original book, and then he took those pictures and turned them into color prints, which went on selling for decades because the book had been just hugely popular. So one more thing that he was very famous for. Theoretically, the 15th century, but actually he just made it up. And he was quite well known for these lavish pseudo-historical furnishings and costumes that he designed for the characters. Now, our other hero, Kuniyoshi. He got off to a slower start. He was a decade younger than Kunisada. So while Kunisada was already a star, he was just one of the many junior artists in the studio. And it took him a long time. He was about 30 before he finally had a hit series that made him a star too. So these are some of his early works. This charming picture of a young woman playing with her cat. She's tickling the cat with her foot. And I think most of us who are or have been cat owners have probably done that at some time. Kuniyoshi loved cats, and lots of cats crop up in his work. So there's an early one. Also shows his sense of humor. And then here is a triptych of a very exciting scene from a history. It's a combination of a war story and a ghost story, where a samurai who was killed appears in a cloud of thunder and strikes down the guy who killed him. That's the revenge of the ghost. And that really is showing where Kuniyoshi is going to go eventually. And while he was successful with these, they weren't huge hits yet. His big breakthrough that made him a top artist was a series that he began to publish in 1828. And interestingly enough, the heroes in this very famous series are actually Chinese. It's not a Japanese story, but a Chinese story that had been translated into easy to read Japanese. It's a very, very famous Chinese novel. Really, I think it's the ancestor of all martial arts movies today. It's called Suikoden in Japanese, Shui Hujuan in Chinese. It's a story that was written in, I believe, the 16th century, but it is a historical novel about a group of heroic bandits in ancient China. So the setting is the 12th century. They're a group of bandits. If the English title is, I call it Outlaws of the Marsh, excuse me. It's also sometimes called the water margin. That's the term for the swampy area around a lake. And supposedly in 12th century China, there was a mountain in the middle of a lake with a swamp around it, and that was the hangout of a group of bandits who, however, were good guys, fighting for the rights of the oppressed and so on. So again, very much like Robin Hood and his merry men in Sherwood Forest, these Chinese heroic bandits out in the marsh. There are 108 of them, which is kind of a magic number in East Asia. And each one of them has a different martial arts skill. So Kuniyoshi started drawing these heroes, and it was a huge success. This was something that was new and different, and people really, really liked it. So there you see on the left, this is fairly understandable, this big brawny guy cutting a tree in half with an iron staff, which is his weapon. Then on the right, you'll notice that this hero has a fabulous tattoo. And he's stripped down to show it off because he's just won a wrestling contest. That's the wrestler's decorated belt that he's wearing because he won the contest. But then the police officials have realized that, hey, that guy who just won the contest is a bandit. They're trying to capture him, but he makes his escape. He's going over the rooftops, and he's pulled off a roof tile and thrown it at them. So that's what's going on here. People just loved these. So they were a very big best-selling hit. Kuniyoshi became one of the top artists. There are lots of tattoos in his prints, by the way, and he, in fact, had tattoos himself. They became popular in real life at just this time, 1820s, 1830s, and there's kind of a chicken and egg question. Was Kuniyoshi drawing something that already existed, or did it to some extent come into existence because he was drawing these great tattoo designs? So this is a follow-up series that he did. He and many other artists did more and more prints of the original Chinese heroes. He actually never quite finished that series. He didn't do all 108 of them. He got off into other subjects. Then he got the idea that he'd do similar heroes from Japanese history. So here are two from a series of supposedly 800 heroes, but he didn't get anywhere near 800. They're pretty wonderful prints. And these two were very successful. So he moved on to do triptychs. This is actually an illustration from a fantasy novel that was published early in the 19th century. The hero of the novel is the guy in the boat at lower left. He's actually a historical character from the civil wars in Japan in the 12th century. And in real life, he died fairly young, but in this fantasy novel, he lives and goes on and has adventures. So he's been shipwrecked, but he's going to be rescued by the flying bird demons who are drawn in this ghostly way. How are we doing on time? I can't see a clock here and I'm a little worried.
Yes, Dr. Thompson, I was just about to interrupt because if we do want to allow some questions, we'll need to find a quick ending, or would you mind taking some questions?
Move along, move along.
Move on to questions, yes?
Let me move along. I should have
move along.
just
Got it.
see what I can do.
Okay.
I won't go into detail about what's going on in these, and anybody who's dying to know can ask me in the questions.
Lovely. Thank you. Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Thompson. Yes.
I know I get excited and I talk too much about them. Anyway, so here's the skeleton once again. Kuniyoshi, by the way, is known to have collected Western prints, and clearly that skeleton came out of something like a Western medical book, but I don't think anyone has identified exactly the source yet. He did do kabuki plays. I told you he liked cats. This is a play about a cat monster, a seemingly sweet old lady in the middle who was actually a giant cat that ate people. But it is a kabuki play. He wasn't as good at likenesses as Kunisada was, but he did make a very exciting scene. This is in your album here. He did lovely images of women, of the bride changing clothes. She seems to be quite a well-off bride if we assume that that's her wardrobe draped over the kimono racks in the background. This very charming print of women playing in the snow, and they're building a snow animal. Usually the Japanese built snow dogs, but this looked as if it might possibly be a snow cat. Hard to tell because some Japanese dogs have little pointy ears and look very cat-like, but maybe it's a cat. Yeah. Kunisada on the left is the one who's really famous for beautiful women, but I think Kuniyoshi is just as good. He does very charming young ladies also. Examples of how the two artists influenced each other. Remember, Kunisada is the kabuki specialist, but Suikoden, the Chinese novel, is hugely popular. Anything that has that name on it will sell. So what does he do? He draws actors from kabuki plays, but in the inscriptions, he explicitly compares them to the heroes, to the Chinese heroes of the Suikoden, the Chui Hujuan. He says this character is like so-and-so, and this character is like who's this? And you'll notice the center one, that is his arm sticking out. He has a big tattoo of a lobster. Kuniyoshi picks up some of Kunisada's technique. He draws fictional or imaginary heroes, but he does them in close-ups the way that Kunisada does the kabuki actors. And also notice one of Kuniyoshi's little jokes, those skulls, those are cats. They're groups of cats bunched together to make the skull shape. Things that Kuniyoshi does that Kunisada doesn't. Humorous things, actor prints drawn as scribbly caricatures. This sort of puzzle print of many bodies and heads. I love this. This is the Cats for the Tokaido Road. So 55 little scenes with cats representing the stations of the Tokaido Road. And then finally, we may not have time to explain these, but these are very exciting. Kuniyoshi was more daring than Kunisada, and he would push the limits of what you could show. You were absolutely forbidden to do anything like a political cartoon. You were in big trouble if you were thought to have criticized the government, but he did several things that people thought might have some meaning of that kind. So here, the hero dreams of a battle between two groups of demons, and this might have something to do with all the unhappiness about some new government policies that clamped down on things like publishing and various kinds of entertainment. A lot of things became illegal. People were unhappy about it. Did he or did he not mean that, or was he just drawing monsters? This is one in your collection. It's the woman doctor and her assistants treating diseases. Theoretically, it is also supposed to be political. Supposedly, the patients are various people in at that time. Kuniyoshi was questioned about this one, called into court and said, "Is this criticizing the government?" "Oh, no, Your Honor, nothing of the kind. I'm just drawing monsters." and they had to let him go because there was no proof, but the print was banned and the blocks were destroyed. In this case, he successfully got off completely. He said, no, I'm illustrating a book that was written in 1805. This one, this is the last one. And this is in your album. It was published in 1853, and some people think it refers to something that had happened actually just 3 days earlier, which was the appearance of Commodore Matthew Perry of the U.S. Navy in the waters near Edo. They wanted to kind of push the Japanese into a trade agreement, and the theory was that this shows all the various members of the Japanese government dancing around not knowing what to do. Is it or isn't it? 3 days is very tight timing, but it's not impossible. So people are still arguing about this one. So finally, this was our show that we had, and we actually had a little quiz in the gallery. Are you Team Kuniyoshi or Team Kunisada? And it's one of those things where you answer questions and see which camp you fall into. So I thought Kuniyoshi would win because he's always been my favorite, but I do like Kunisada very much also. And in fact, yes, Kuniyoshi won, but not by much. Kunisada had a strong following as well. So the question is still open, and you can think about it for yourself and decide which you like the best. Okay, I'm sure I've run over, but are there questions?
There are quite a few. Thank you, first of all, for that wonderful talk. The first question is more technical in terms of what was the average number of prints a set of blocks could be used before they deteriorated beyond being able to make a quality print?
Right. Well, we know of one very popular series by Kuniyoshi where they actually made over 5,000 per block. However, judging by some of the surviving prints of that series, there were an awful lot of very smudgy prints. You can probably get up to about 2,000 because before it starts looking really bad. You can push it to 5,000, but you are pushing, and they get worse and worse as you go along. So great. Yes,
yeah, it's 2,000 that's quite a number.
It's a lot. It's a lot. And even at 2,000, you will be seeing the wear on the blocks.
Yeah. Related to this printing process, not the technical aspects, but in terms of how much the artists actually control they had about choosing the colors, right?
Yeah. This is another thing that people often ask about. Who chose the color? Not certain. Best guess is probably the artist would make the choice originally. But then remember, the publisher is the person in charge of everything. They could veto it if they didn't like it for any reason. And then I think sometimes the printer might have some choice also. I strongly suspect that occasionally there would be situations where in the middle of the print run, the printer ran out of one color and substituted another. Because there are cases where, for example, you have a blue-green in some of the impressions and a yellow-green in other impressions, and yet they both seem to be very good with sharp, undamaged blocks. So why the difference?
Right.
And I've always assumed the printer was either experimenting or they actually had a little emergency and ran out of color.
Right. So related also to this, then the next step is the censorship, right? So
yes.
And you did address this towards the end. I know we had to rush through a little bit. Yes. So how difficult was it to work around the censorship, and were the artists really able to continue selling their works, if they didn't have government approval?
Yes. Well, there were, they went right on making the erotica and selling it under the table. And I don't know of any case of anyone actually being punished for that. Although I suspect that some of the punishments for things that don't seem that bad may really have been for something like explicit erotica that the government didn't even want to admit existed. So I suspect that may have happened sometimes. Of course, it's, I mean, unless we got, somebody's diary in which they confess everything they did, we're not going to know for sure. There were times when it was difficult. For instance, there was a period in the, from 1842 to 1846, there was a period when actor prints were banned. No actor prints at all, which was a huge problem for all of the artists, especially for someone like Kunisada. I mean, he could still draw women. He experimented drawing historical scenes. Then they said, all right, you can draw actors, you just can't put their names on. So then we kind of go back. Actually, this drives us art historians nuts, because this is how I came to appreciate Kunisada. Because then when we're trying to figure out, all right, what play is this? Who is this that's shown? Their names aren't on the prints. But Kunisada draws them in such a way that you can recognize them anyway, which is really great. This is what made me really understand why people liked him so much. So there are ways to work around it.
Right. Returning a little bit to the technical aspects. So one of our participants has noticed that in the last two prints, one block is needed for each color, right? So then it seems though that it's really difficult to undertake these patterns in various colors, especially on the clothing, maybe in the detail.
Okay, I'm not sure what exactly they're referring to. Sometimes, of course, you can print one color over another. So that may be what if, for instance, in this, I'm looking here at just two, Kuniyoshi and Kunisada images. So that, yeah, the blue part of the man's costume, I suspect probably the darker blue was printed over the lighter blue. If that's what they were thinking of. Something like the woman's sash here, that's a very complex pattern. But basically, again, it's just those guide marks that they were using. And some of it, frankly, is the manual dexterity of the printer. I have tried doing this myself and made a mess, but a person who was doing it for a living could very neatly put them down using those guide marks and get it right almost every time. So I'm not sure if I understood the question, but I'm not hearing you.
Of course,
Sorry.
you
Okay,
have to tell me. Unmute. Yes, I think that did answer the question. Thank you so much.
Right.
Yeah, so I'll let you off on this easy one to finish up. Is there a particular print that made you fall in love with ukiyo-e?
It's hard to put. I cannot think off. I can tell you what my favorite print is now. I showed it to you. It's the Cats of Hokkaido, which was a recent acquisition at the MFA. We did not put it in the show because we didn't have it yet. And I really, really love it now. And you're a cat lover. This is great. And it was very funny when we brought it in, and we're showing it to the committee that had to decide. We learned a lot about each other, because about half the people on the committee just went nuts and going, "Oh, this is wonderful! I'm just so great," and the other people were going, "I don't get it." The dog people were just sort of bewildered, or the non-animal people. But something at the beginning, it's hard to say. I used Utamaro for a long time was my favorite. The one in the 1790s doing the very, very elegant and beautiful women. He was my favorite for a long time. Although I can't think of one single image by him that I really liked. But gradually I've kind of come around to Kuniyoshi. So, and yeah, definitely the cats now. And probably if I have to pick a second one, then the skeleton and the figure of the beautiful but evil sorceress. I like her a lot.
I think you cheated a little with about 3 or 4 there that you really loved. And this is what has made this talk the excitement of seeing these again and talking and sharing them with us. Thank you so much, Dr. Thompson, for this lovely talk. And yes, I think I will be happy to follow up with other questions if anyone has them, and forward them on to you.
Sure.
Yes. Thank you. Have a nice evening, everyone. Good night.
Yes. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.